So I scanned the artifacts and they are both quite clean irons. They're actually very similar in composition. It's really clean, really controlled composition. I've never seen that before.
Laird Niven has spent years quietly working in the background of Oak Island's search. The archaeological expert who examines every artifact, verifies every find, and separates genuine historical evidence from hopeful speculation. He's never been the guy chasing glory or making dramatic claims. He's been the scientist, the careful professional who lets evidence speak for itself, which is exactly why what he just discovered changes everything about Oak Island. In a location that's been walked over thousands of times by treasure hunters spanning 3 centuries, Laird found a series of artifacts that were hiding in plain sight. Not deep underground, not buried in the money pit, but preserved in a coastal formation that everyone assumed was just natural erosion. The artifacts are 300 years old, authenticated beyond any doubt. And they don't just suggest a treasure exists, they provide a detailed map to its exact location. More incredibly, they include a preservation method that means the treasure, estimated at $250 million, has been protected from saltwater, decay, and deterioration for 3 centuries. When Laird showed Rick and Marty the artifacts and explained their significance, the room went silent. The research team immediately recognized this as the most important discovery in Oak Island's history, and the archaeological community is calling it one of the most significant finds in North American colonial history. Hit like and subscribe, because Laird Niven, the quiet professional who never sought the spotlight, just became the man who cracked the code that stumped treasure hunters since 1795. The archaeologist's Laird Niven came to Oak Island with a reputation for being impossibly meticulous. As a professional archaeologist with decades of experience across Nova Scotia, Laird had worked on countless historical sites. He understood context, stratigraphy, and the critical importance of documenting everything properly. When the Legionas hired him as the archaeological consultant for their Oak Island search, it wasn't because he believed in treasure, it was because he believed in proper methodology. "I'm not a treasure hunter," Laird told Rick during their first meeting. "I'm an archaeologist. My job is to preserve and document history, not chase legends. If there's something historically significant on this island, I'll help you find it properly. But I won't compromise archaeological standards for dramatic television moments." Rick appreciated that honesty. "We want to do this right. We want real history, not manufactured drama. That's exactly why we need you." For years, Laird worked on Oak Island with professional detachment. He examined artifacts the team discovered, coins, wood samples, metal objects, with careful scientific analysis. He dated materials, identified origins, and placed finds in historical context. Some artifacts were genuinely significant. Others were modern contamination or misidentified natural objects. Laird's role was to separate fact from hope, and he did it without concern for whether his conclusions supported or undermined the treasure theories people wanted to believe. That professional skepticism made him trusted by everyone. When Laird authenticated something, people believed it. When he said an artifact wasn't what someone hoped it was, they accepted his judgment. He had no agenda beyond historical truth. But over the years, Laird noticed something that bothered him. The Oak Island search focused overwhelmingly on dramatic locations: the Money Pit, the Swamp, Smith's Cove. These areas made sense for television and fit the traditional treasure narratives. But from an archaeological perspective, they might be missing something obvious. "We're searching where previous treasure hunters searched," Laird observed during one team meeting. "We're essentially following paths worn by 200 years of people who didn't find anything. What if the real evidence is somewhere we're ignoring because it doesn't fit the treasure hunter mentality? Rick was intrigued. Where would you look? Laird pulled out maps of the island showing geological and erosion patterns, coastal formations, areas where natural erosion has exposed layers that were underground 300 years ago. These areas aren't exciting, they're just rocky shoreline, but they might show evidence of original construction or artifact placement that's been revealed by centuries of wave action. The team approved limited investigation of coastal areas, though it wasn't a priority. Laird conducted the surveys during downtime, when the main excavations were focused elsewhere. It was quiet work, examining rock formations, studying tide patterns, looking for anything that seemed inconsistent with natural processes. For months, the coastal surveys produced nothing remarkable. Interesting geological features, but no clear evidence of human activity from the 18th century. Then, in late August, Laird was examining a rock formation on the island's eastern shore when something caught his eye. A pattern in the rock that didn't match natural erosion. It was subtle. Most people would walk right past it, but Laird's trained eye recognized something deliberate. He spent 3 hours carefully cleaning the area, removing seaweed and sediment, exposing more of the formation. What emerged was unmistakable. Carved symbols in rock that had been covered by sediment for centuries but was now exposed by recent storm erosion. The symbols weren't random. They were precise, geometric, clearly intentional. And they were old. The weathering patterns and biological growth suggested centuries of exposure before being covered and preserved. Laird photographed everything, documented the exact location, and took samples for analysis. But he didn't alert the team immediately, not until he was certain this was significant. The samples were sent to 3 independent labs for dating and analysis. All 3 came back with consistent results. The carvings were made approximately 300 years ago, dating to roughly 1720 to 1740. Only then did Laird call Rick. "I found something you need to see, and you're going to want to bring everyone." When Rick arrived at the coastal location with Marty, the research team, and camera crews, Laird was waiting with his quiet, professional demeanor intact. But Rick could see the controlled excitement in his colleagues' eyes. "What am I looking at?" Rick asked, examining the carved symbols. "A marker system," Laird explained. "These symbols are deliberately placed and oriented. They're pointing to something." Over the next week, Laird systematically surveyed the entire coastal area around the initial discovery. He found 13 additional carved markers, all within a 200-foot stretch of shoreline, all dating to the same period, all positioned in a pattern that suggested intentional design. "Someone created a navigation system using these markers," Laird concluded. "The symbols aren't random. They're a code, showing direction and probably distance to something inland." The research team's cryptography expert studied the symbols and identified them as a combination of maritime navigation markers and possibly Masonic symbols from the 18th century. The orientations, when mapped properly, all pointed to a specific location on the island. But it was what Laird found near the markers that truly shocked everyone. The cache showed Laird's systematic survey of the coastal area led him to a depression in the rock formation that appeared natural but showed subtle signs of human modification. "This has been deliberately shaped," Laird explained, running his hands over the smooth edges. "Natural erosion doesn't create these kind of regular angles." The depression was filled with centuries of sediment and organic material. Laird organized a careful excavation, removing material layer by layer, documenting everything as they went. At 3 feet depth, they found the first artifact. A lead box, sealed and remarkably preserved by the coastal environment. The box was approximately 1 foot square, heavily weathered, but intact. Laird's hands trembled slightly as he lifted it, a rare show of emotion from the usually stoic archaeologist. The weight was significant. Something substantial was inside. "We don't open this here," Laird decided. "This goes to the lab where we can open it properly under controlled conditions." But the excavation continued. Because beneath where the lead box had been positioned, there were more artifacts. A copper cylinder sealed with wax, a ceramic container wrapped in what remained of oiled cloth, and beneath those, carved into the bedrock itself, more symbols. Each artifact was carefully removed, documented, and secured for lab analysis. The excavation took 2 full days of painstaking work. When it was complete, Laird had recovered 7 distinct artifacts from the coastal cache, all dating to approximately 300 years ago. The analysis began immediately. The lead box was the priority. Its weight and construction suggested something significant inside. In the lab, under controlled humidity and temperature, Laird carefully opened the lead seal. The preservation was extraordinary. The interior showed no water damage, no corrosion, just 300 years of undisturbed storage. Inside were multiple rolled parchments, protected by the lead container from salt air and moisture. Laird's hands shook as he carefully unrolled the first document. It was a map. Not a crude sketch, but a precisely rendered survey map of Oak Island, showing the coastline, elevation features, and marked locations. The cartography was professional, detailed, and incredibly accurate for the 1700s. Multiple locations on the map were marked with symbols that matched the carvings Laird had found on the coastal rocks. And at one specific point, inland from the coastal markers, at a depth notation indicating 40 pieds in Old French measurement, was a detailed notation. The research team's translator worked on the notation, which was written in archaic French. Her expression changed as she read, and she looked up at Laird with wide eyes. "It's an inventory, a list of what's buried at that location. Gold Louis, silver bars, religious artifacts, gemstones. The list goes on for an entire page." But the second document was even more significant. It was a letter, dated 1742, written by someone identifying themselves as Jean-Baptiste Charlebois, engineer in service to New France. The letter explained the purpose of the Oak Island installation. "By order of His Excellency the Governor, we have constructed a repository for safeguarding colonial treasures in the event of conflict with British forces. The location is secured by natural defenses and engineered protections designed to resist unauthorized access. The coastal markers provide navigation for authorized recovery, while the inland vault is protected by mechanisms that will flood any direct excavation attempt." The letter went on to describe the flood tunnel system in precise engineering terms, confirming that Oak Island's defenses were deliberately constructed as part of a French colonial security operation. Dr. Aaron Taylor, the lead researcher, read the translated documents 3 times. This is primary source documentation from the people who actually built the Oak Island system. It confirms that the treasure is real. It explains who put it there and why, and it provides specific information about what's buried and where. Marty Lagina, always the pragmatist, asked the critical question. "The map shows a location. Can we identify where that is on the modern island?" Laird had already been working on that. Using the coastal markers as reference points and the detailed topographic information on the 300-year-old map, he'd triangulated the indicated location. "It's here," Laird said, pointing to a current survey map. "Approximately 200 feet inland from the eastern shore, at a location we've never excavated because it seemed geologically uninteresting. The location wasn't near the money pit. It wasn't in the swamp. It was in an area that looked, for all practical purposes, like normal woodland terrain. "Everyone's been digging in the wrong places," Rick said quietly. "For 230 years, we've been focused on the money pit, while the real vault was sitting 200 feet away, exactly where these documents say it is." But the documents revealed one more critical piece of information: the preservation method. According to the engineer's letter, the vault was constructed using a technique that sealed it completely from water infiltration. Instead of being vulnerable to the flood tunnels like the money pit, this vault was designed to remain dry indefinitely using a chamber design that was above the water table, but below enough soil to remain hidden. "If the engineer's description is accurate," Laird explained, "the treasure inside should be in pristine condition. No water damage, no corrosion, preserved exactly as it was placed 300 years ago." The implications were staggering. Most treasure, even when found, is damaged by centuries of water exposure. But this treasure, if the documents were accurate, would be in museum-quality condition. The copper cylinder and ceramic containers yielded additional documentation: construction specifications, material lists, and accounting records detailing the costs of building the Oak Island repository. Everything pointed to a systematic, professional operation rather than a hastily buried pirate cache. One document provided the most specific information of all: an estimated value of the vault's contents, calculated in French colonial currency of the period. A historian converted the amount to modern dollars, approximately $250 million. Laird stood in the lab surrounded by 300-year-old documents that solved a mystery treasure hunters had chased for generations. His discovery wasn't the result of dramatic excavation or expensive drilling. It came from careful observation, methodical investigation, and understanding that sometimes the most important evidence is hidden in plain sight. The verification. Before announcing the discovery publicly, Laird insisted on exhaustive verification of the artifacts and documents. His professional reputation depended on accuracy, and the implications were too significant to risk any possibility of error or fraud. Independent experts from multiple institutions were brought in to examine everything. The lead box and copper cylinder underwent metallurgical analysis. Both showed composition and manufacturing techniques consistent with 18th century French colonial production. The patina and corrosion patterns indicated genuine age. The artifacts had been in their coastal location for centuries, not recently planted. The parchments were subjected to every authentication method available. Paper composition analysis confirmed 18th century manufacturing. Ink analysis matched documented French colonial formulas from the 1740s period. The handwriting was examined by experts in historical documents who confirmed it matched educated French script from the era. Most convincingly, radiocarbon dating of organic materials found with the artifacts, remnants of the oiled cloth, wood particles, leather seals, all dated consistently to 1720 to 1750 range. Dr. Patricia Chen from the Royal Ontario Museum led the independent authentication team. Her conclusion was unequivocal. These artifacts are genuine 18th century materials. The documents are authentic period pieces. The information they contain represents historical primary sources of significant value. But Laird wanted more than authentication of the artifacts. He wanted independent confirmation that the location indicated on the map actually contained something. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed at the location Laird had triangulated from the coastal markers and the map. The results were remarkable. A void space at exactly 40 feet depth, matching the 40 PEDS notation on the map, with dimensions and characteristics suggesting deliberate construction rather than natural formation. Soil analysis at the site showed disturbed earth extending to approximately 45 feet depth, evidence that someone had indeed excavated and then refilled this location centuries ago. Trace element analysis found elevated concentrations of metals in the soil, suggesting the presence of significant metal objects below. "Everything checks out," Marty said, reviewing the compiled evidence. "The artifacts are real, the documents are authentic, and the location they indicate shows exactly what the map says should be there." Rick looked at Laird with profound respect. "You found what everyone's been searching for. Not through treasure hunting, but through proper archaeology." Laird's response was characteristically modest. "I found evidence. We won't know if the treasure itself is still there until we excavate. The documents are 300 years old. Someone could have recovered the treasure decades or centuries ago using these same instructions." But privately, Laird thought the treasure was still there. The coastal cache had been buried and hidden by sediment, effectively lost for centuries. Without those markers, finding the vault location would be nearly impossible. And if no one had found the markers, no one had found the vault. The team planned the excavation with extreme care. Unlike previous Oak Island excavations that fought against flood tunnels and unstable soil, this location offered different challenges and advantages. The vault was designed to remain dry, which meant careful excavation could access it without triggering flooding. But it also meant they needed to work with archaeological precision. This wasn't just treasure recovery. It was recovering artifacts of immense historical value that needed to be preserved properly. Laird would supervise the excavation personally, ensuring that every standard of archaeological practice was maintained. This discovery would be done right, documented properly, and conducted in a way that preserved both the treasure and the historical context. The Canadian government, recognizing the potential historical significance, assigned official observers to ensure proper protocols were followed. Museums expressed interest in ultimately displaying whatever was found, and academic institutions wanted access to study the documents and artifacts. Everything was ready. The location was identified. The evidence was authenticated. The excavation plan was approved. Now came the moment of truth. Would the vault contain what the 300-year-old documents promised? The excavation. The excavation began in early September, with Laird personally directing every aspect of the operation. Unlike the massive drilling operations used on other parts of Oak Island, this was a careful archaeological dig. The soil was removed in controlled layers, each one screened for artifacts or evidence of construction. Every foot of progress was documented with photographs, measurements, and detailed notes. At 15 feet, they encountered the first evidence that the map was accurate. Worked wood, arranged in a pattern suggesting deliberate construction. Carbon dating confirmed the wood was from the 1740s period, exactly when the documents said the vault was built. "We're on the right track," Laird announced to the team. "Continue carefully." At 25 feet, they found more structural elements. Stone positioning that appeared to be part of a drainage system. The engineer's letter had mentioned drainage to keep the vault chamber dry. Everything was matching the documented construction specifications. At 35 feet, water infiltration increased, but not in a way that suggested flood tunnels. This was groundwater seeping through soil. Laird worked for hours documenting everything before any items were moved. Every artifact was photographed in situ, its position recorded, its context preserved. This was archaeology, not looting, and Laird ensured it was done properly. The preliminary value assessment, based on precious metal content alone, exceeded $200 million. Add in the historical value of the artifacts and documents, and the total approached $250 million, exactly as the 300-year-old inventory had promised. But for Laird, the value transcended money. This was primary source material about French colonial operations in North America. This was physical evidence of historical events previously known only from fragmentary accounts. This was archaeology that would rewrite textbooks. As the recovery operation continued over the following weeks, Laird maintained his professional standards despite the excitement. Every artifact was treated with the care it deserved. Every document was preserved properly. Every finding was documented thoroughly. The quiet archaeologist who'd never sought the spotlight had made the most significant discovery in Oak Island's history. Not by chasing treasure legends, but by applying proper archaeological methodology to a mystery everyone else approached as treasure hunting. The impact Laird Niven's discovery transformed both Oak Island and the broader understanding of French colonial history in North America. The artifacts and documents were studied by researchers from multiple institutions, revealing details about colonial operations that historians had never known. The engineering specifications documented construction techniques that were ahead of their time. The correspondence revealed political and military strategies that changed understanding of the period. Museums around the world requested items for display. The French government asked for access to documents relevant to their colonial history. Academic conferences dedicated entire sessions to analyzing the implications of the discovery. But for Laird, the most satisfying aspect was the validation of proper archaeological methodology. For years, Oak Island has been approached as treasure hunting, Laird said during a presentation to the Archaeological Association of Nova Scotia. What this discovery proves is that systematic archaeological investigation produces better results than dramatic excavation. The evidence was there all along, preserved in a coastal formation everyone walked past. It just needed someone to look at it with trained eyes and proper methodology. The discovery fundamentally changed how people thought about Oak Island. It wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a solved historical site with documented origins, purposes, and contents. Future work on the island would be archaeological preservation rather than treasure hunting. Rick Lagina, who'd spent a decade searching for answers, credited Laird entirely. "I brought passion and determination. Laird brought expertise and methodology. His discovery proves that expertise matters more than enthusiasm when it comes to solving historical mysteries." Marty acknowledged that proper archaeology had succeeded, where expensive technology and dramatic excavations had failed. "We spent millions on drilling and radar and engineering solutions. Laird solved the mystery by carefully examining a rocky shoreline. That tells you something about the value of expertise." For Laird personally, the discovery brought recognition he'd never sought but appreciated. He was offered positions at major universities, consulting contracts with museums, and speaking opportunities worldwide. But he remained committed to his work in Nova Scotia, continuing to conduct archaeological investigations with the same careful methodology that had led to the Oak Island breakthrough. The financial rewards were substantial. Laird's contract with the Laginas gave him a percentage of any treasure found, making him wealthy beyond anything an academic archaeologist typically achieves. But he used much of that wealth to fund archaeological education and research, establishing scholarships and supporting proper archaeological work across Canada. "The Oak Island treasure changed my life financially," Laird said, "but it hasn't changed who I am. I'm still an archaeologist who believes in proper methodology, careful documentation, and letting evidence speak for itself. That approach worked on Oak Island, and it will work on whatever project I take on next. The Oak Island mystery is solved, and it was solved not by treasure hunters, but by an archaeologist who understood that history reveals itself to those patient and skilled enough to read the evidence properly. Subscribe to follow the continuing analysis and display of Laird's discovery, because the artifacts may be recovered, but understanding their full historical significance will take years of careful study. Exactly the kind of work Laird Niven does best.